Welcome viewers, this is Kyle with KD Automotive. Today we're going to be taking a look at a Yamaha TT350. This bike was unfortunately a victim of very poor ownership. The cases are going to need to be replaced for a number of reasons. You can see in a second here that they're cracked. They were damaged due to a chain that broke. And in just a second here, I'm going to show you that piece right there is missing. And then that silver set screw that holds in the clutch detent, that is actually just now threaded into epoxy, which has been spray painted black and then passed off to the current owner without his knowledge. It also suffered a bottom end seized up crankshaft bearings, which caused the outer race of the bearings to spin in the case. Aside from that, we already had to replace the Kickstarter shaft, and then these three silver fasteners holding the oil filter housing are unfortunately quarter 20, and if you're watching this, you should probably know that that is incorrect. All of these fasteners should be M6. In this video, we're going to be doing the teardown at the top end, and to get started with that, we're going to pull off the valve cover. This is going to be held on by 5mm Allen screws. Next up, we're going to go ahead and remove the decompression cable. At the top, this is held on by one 5mm Allen screw. And at the bottom, it's held in by one of the 5mm Allen screws that goes through the case, and then one 10mm nut. We're going to go ahead and put all these fasteners back where they came from for now. And next up, we're going to go ahead and remove the oil supply line. This is held on by two 12mm banjo bolts. And on each side of this oil supply line, there should be two copper washers, so 4 in total. There should be one on each side of the line. Next up, we're going to go ahead and remove the 2 air intake boots. These are going to be held on by 4 5mm head Allen screws. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the timing chain tensioner. This is held on by 2 more 5mm head Allen screws. Now that we got the timing chain free, we're going to go ahead and remove the 8 10mm hex head screws that are holding in the camshaft retaining caps. These camshaft retaining caps are marked for their position, but the marks are relatively unclear, so it's going to be important that you go ahead and just set those in an orientation that's going to allow you to put them back into the same spot when you're done. And a good trick with these, if they're a little bit tough to get out, is to take one of your M6 fasteners and go ahead and thread it into the valve cover threaded hole, and then once you've got that threaded in there, it gives you something to grab onto, and it makes it relatively easy to remove them. Also, each one of these caps is going to have 2 locating dowels through each of the fasteners, and it's going to be important to make sure you keep track of those because some of them are going to want to stay inside the head. Alright, now we're ready to go ahead and remove the 2 camshafts. These are clearly labeled intake and exhaust, so you're not going to have too much trouble getting these mixed up. But we are going to want to probably wrap these up and set them aside. Also, if you're only doing work on the head or maybe just a top end rebuild, you're going to probably want to go ahead and put a coat hanger or something similar through the timing chain instead of allowing it to drop into the bottom end as I've done. But in our case, we're going to be doing a full rebuild and replacing the cases, so for us it's not important. So after this, we're going to go ahead and remove the cylinder head. The cylinder head is held on by 4 14mm head bolts, 2 5mm head Allen screws, and 2 12mm nuts. The 12mm nuts are going to be on the exterior of the engine, one in the front and one in the back. You're going to want to remove those first, then the 5mm head Allen bolts, and then last you're going to remove the 4 14mm head bolts. The reason that you're going to want to do this is once you remove the 4 14mm head bolts, the torque that's on the additional fasteners is actually going to increase, and those 2 12mm nuts are in a pretty tight spot, and if you try and do them last, you're going to end up stripping them out, and after you do that, you're going to be in a pretty bad spot. Okay, so right here you're going to see me taking off these 4 14mm head bolts. These are the 4 that you're actually going to do last. There's 4 more fasteners that you're going to want to do before these, and it is important that you do it in the correct order, as we're about to find out. Also, if you can see, I have a 1/2-inch breaker bar put through the swing arm bolt position. If you're working on a bike, on the engine outside of the bike, it's going to make it a lot easier to get these head bolts on, because they are torqued down pretty well. Alright, so right here, this is one of the 12mm nuts. This is going to be the first fastener that you take off. You're going to want to make sure that you do this before you take off the 14mm head bolts. You can't get a box end wrench around this. You have to use an open end. It's in a very tight spot. This back one came off okay, but the front one, you're going to see, we're going to have to re-torque the head bolts in order to get it off. You're going to want to be very careful to not strip these out, because they're in a pretty precarious position. Alright, and so we had to go ahead and retorque these two front head bolts. Because like I was saying, you have to do these 4 laps. The 2 12mm nuts on the bottom of the jug you're going to do first. Then you're going to do the 2 Allen head screws, and then the 14mm last. I chose to leave this in instead of editing it out, just to kind of emphasize the importance of taking these out in the correct order. Alright, and as you can see, now that we have the 2 14mm bolts secured, these 12mm nuts come out relatively easy. Alright, and these are the 2 5mm head Allen screws that I was talking about. These are the second set of fasteners that you're going to remove. Alright, and once those are all off, your cylinder head and cylinder are going to be free. And just to recap, you're going to do the 2 12mm nuts first, and then the 2 5mm head Allen screws second, and then the 4 14mm head bolts last. We already went ahead and cleaned up and put a new set of valves in, and went ahead and make sure and replace the shims so that the clearances were correct. This project has been kind of goofy. It's been pretty tough getting parts for this bike, so some of this is a little out of order. Also, there are 2 locating dowels adjacent to the timing chain. You're going to want to make sure that you keep track of those, because some of them are going to want to stay in the head and the other ones might stay in the cylinder. Alright, now that you have that done, you can go ahead and slide your cylinder off. The cylinder is not in bad shape. We are going to be replacing the piston. I'm going to go ahead and see if we can get the cylinder board over, because they do have oversized pistons available. We haven't quite decided on that, but we should find out before the next video. Next, you want to go ahead and grab a pick, and we're going to remove the retaining clip from either side of the piston. You're going to see me pushing out the wrist pin using that same pick. If you're going to be reusing your piston or wrist pin, you're going to want to do this with something that's not going to mar the finish. We're not going to be reusing any of these parts, so for us it's not important, but if you are reusing the parts, you're going to want to be careful not to scratch them. Like I said before, if you're going to be reusing your piston or your wrist pin, you're going to want to remove this in a way as to not mar the finish with something like a wooden or maybe a polymer dowel. But we are going to be replacing these parts, so we're just going to pull them out, and I'll show you why in a second here. Yeah, so you can see the wrist pin in this bike is pretty worn. We're going to be replacing that. This engine was seized up at some point. Alright, so that's going to finish up part 1. It's going to be the complete disassembly of the top end. In part 2, we're going to start tearing down the bottom end. And again, this is Kyle with KD Automotive. We're located in Tempe, AZ. Thanks for watching.